My name is Caroline, and my own father abandoned me at the airport when I was 32 years old, just to enjoy a luxury trip with his new wife and her entitled children. What he did not realize as he walked away toward his first-class seat was that he had just handed a forensic auditor the very weapon needed to destroy his entire life. I called the estranged mother he had painted as a villain for 20 years. 2 hours later, she landed in a private jet ready for war. When my father returned from his tropical paradise, he found an empty house, changed locks, and a federal legal notice sitting on his bed. His wife screamed in sheer panic, but it was already too late. I am Caroline, 32 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon at OHare International Airport, I had spent my entire life being the designated shock absorber for my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your family and had to stand up against people who demanded your loyalty but offered you nothing but disrespect. Because what happened next was not just revenge, it was a masterclass in karma executed with the cold, hard precision of the law. I stood at gate 24, gripping the handle of my modest carry-on luggage, surrounded by the chaotic hum of thousands of travelers. We were supposed to be boarding a flight to Maui for my father David and his 58th birthday. The vacation was pitched to me as a family healing trip, a rare opportunity for us to bond. Instead, it became the execution site of our relationship. Hand it over. Caroline, my stepmother, Sylvia snapped. She did not even look up from her designer sunglasses as she extended her manicured hand. Hand what over? I asked, confusion momentarily paralyzing me. Your boarding pass, do not make me ask twice. Sylvia used a tone that was not just rude, but possessed a specific venomous entitlement reserved entirely for me. She was 50, draped head to toe in luxury labels that I knew for a fact my father could not afford on his failing company salary. Behind her stood her two biological children, Tristan, who was 26, and Brittany, who was 24. They were whispering to each other, their eyes darting toward me, with barely suppressed smirks. Tristan, a man who had never held a job for more than 3 months, was practically vibrating with amusement. Sylvia, I checked in online. My pass is on my phone, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. As a forensic auditor for a major private equity firm in Chicago, my entire career was built on maintaining composure in high-stress situations. I dealt with millions of dollars in corporate fraud daily, yet nothing triggered my anxiety quite like my own family. Well, delete it. David finally spoke, stepping out from behind his wife. My father, the CEO of a mid-sized materials supply company that had been hemorrhaging money for 3 consecutive quarters, looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance. There has been a change of plans, Caroline. What kind of change? My heart began to pound against my ribs. We upgraded, Brittany chimed in, stepping forward to flash her first-class ticket directly in my face. Tristan and I are flying up front with Mom and David. The legroom in coach is basically a human rights violation. I looked from Brittany to my father, the pieces clicking together with sickening speed. You upgraded them, Dad. I paid for my own coach ticket. You told me the airline overbooked the flight and you were handling the reservations to ensure we all sat together. And I did handle it. David sighed heavily, adopting the long-suffering tone he always used when I dared to question his logic. The airline offered a heavily discounted package for 4 first-class upgrades. But you have to buy them in blocks of 4. So Sylvia called the airline yesterday and canceled your coach ticket to apply the credit toward the upgrade fees. It was a simple administrative decision. He said it so casually, a simple administrative decision. You canceled my ticket, I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You canceled my ticket to a family vacation that you begged me to attend just so your stepchildren could have extra legroom. Oh, stop playing the victim. Caroline, Sylvia scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her oversized frames. You are 32 years old. You sit in a cubicle all day crunching numbers. You are used to living frugally and staying home. Tristan has been incredibly stressed looking for work, and Brittany just went through a terrible breakup. They need this luxury experience for their mental health. You would not understand, you are just too stiff. The gaslighting was so profound, so expertly delivered, that for a split second my brain almost tried to rationalize it. This was the dynamic I had been conditioned to accept since I was 12 years old. When David divorced my biological mother, Catherine, he fed me and my older sister, Rachel, a relentless diet of lies. He claimed Catherine was an unstable, selfish woman who abandoned us to chase young men and empty thrills. He painted himself as the martyr, the heroic single father who sacrificed everything until Sylvia came along. Since then, the family structure was brutally clear. Sylvia and her children were the royalty. I was the peasant allowed to exist in their orbit only when they needed something. Usually it was money. Dad, I said, ignoring Sylvia and staring directly into my father's eyes. My ticket cost $800. You stole my property to pay for their upgrades. David flushed with immediate rage. He hated the word stole. He preferred reallocated. Do not use that tone with me, he hissed furiously. I am your father. I put a roof over your head. The house you currently live in is technically still half mine. You owe this family far more than an $800 airline ticket. This trip is about family bonding, and your negative energy is exactly why we did not want you on the plane in the first place. If you did not want me on the plane, why did you invite me? I demanded, the sheer injustice of the situation finally shattering my professional facade. Tristan snickered loudly, adjusting the collar of his expensive polo shirt. Because David needed to show his board of directors that he is a dedicated family man before his company goes under. But honestly, Caroline, nobody actually wanted you in Maui. You are a massive buzzkill. I stood paralyzed. The absolute cruelty of their coordinated attack left me breathless. They had not just excluded me, they had financially exploited me and orchestrated my public humiliation at an international terminal, treating me as nothing more than a disposable asset to fund their delusions of grandeur. Boarding for Flight 892 to Maui. First-class passengers only, the gate agent announced over the intercom. Sylvia clapped her hands together. Oh, that is us. Come on, kids. She turned back to me, unzipped her designer bag, and pulled out a crumpled $100 bill. She tossed it onto the top of my suitcase, where it fluttered uselessly before settling near the handle. Here, she said with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Go get yourself a nice dinner at the food court, and since you will be home all week, be a dear and deep clean Brittany's bathroom before we get back. She left a bit of a mess. Oh, and make sure the pool boy is paid. I stared at the crumpled $100 bill sitting on my luggage. The green ink seemed to mock me, serving as a tangible representation of exactly what I was worth to them. $100. A fraction of what they had stolen from my bank account, and a microscopic drop in the bucket of what they had taken from my life over the past 2 decades. Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. The heat of my anger had suddenly turned into absolute freezing ice. Are you really going to walk onto that plane and leave me standing here? David adjusted his expensive blazer, a blazer I knew for a fact was bought using a corporate credit card he was currently hiding from his accounting department. He would not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, then at the departure screen, looking anywhere but at the daughter he was discarding. You are 32, Caroline. Stop making a scene, he muttered, his tone dripping with cowardice. You have a good job. You are a smart girl. Just order an Uber, go back to the house, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Try to reflect on your attitude while we are gone. Maybe if you were more supportive of Tristan and Brittany, you would not feel so isolated in this family. With that, he turned his back on me. I watched them walk away. Tristan playfully shoved his sister as they handed their boarding passes to the gate agent. Sylvia looped her arm through my father's, leaning her head on his shoulder in a picture-perfect display of suburban bliss. They walked down the jet bridge, laughing, completely unbothered by the fact that they had just ripped my heart out and stepped on it. I did not cry. For the first time in my life, standing in the middle of the airport with travelers rushing past me, the tears simply refused to come. The lifelong conditioning that told me to apologize, to make myself smaller, to beg for their approval, completely vanished. It evaporated into the sterile airport air, replaced by the razor-sharp analytical mind of a forensic auditor. They saw me as a quiet, boring number cruncher. They forgot that people in my profession literally dismantle criminal empires for a living by following the paper trails arrogant people leave behind. I picked up the $100 bill, folded it precisely in half, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I turned my luggage cart around and walked away from gate 24. I did not head toward the exit. I did not pull out my phone to order the Uber my father had so generously suggested. Instead, I walked directly toward the airline's private VIP lounge. I found a quiet corner in the lounge, paid the day pass entry fee with my own corporate card, and sat down in a leather armchair. I pulled out my phone and stared at the contact list. There was a number I had not dialed in 20 years. A number I had kept hidden in the deepest recesses of my phone, saved simply under a single letter. My father had spent half my life telling me that Catherine, my biological mother, was a penniless addict who ran off with a younger man. He told me she did not want me or my older sister Rachel. But a forensic auditor knows how to look past the surface. 3 years ago, while doing a routine background check for a corporate merger, I stumbled across a financial filing that made my blood run cold. Catherine was not a penniless addict. Catherine was the founder and CEO of a massive venture capital firm based in Silicon Valley. She was a self-made billionaire. And more importantly, according to the sealed court documents I had quietly unearthed, she had never abandoned us. David had forged her signature, committed perjury, and legally blocked her from our lives while simultaneously draining millions of dollars in alimony and child support she had sent specifically for us. He used her money to build his fake suburban life. I called her. It rang exactly twice before a crisp, professional voice answered the line. Catherine Sterling's office. How may I direct your call? Hi, I said, my voice surprisingly steady given the pounding in my chest. This is Caroline. I need to speak with her. There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. I am sorry, but Miss Sterling is currently leading a board meeting. May I take a message and have her return your call? Tell her it is Caroline, her daughter. Tell her David left me at the airport and I finally opened my eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the sharp intake of breath from the assistant. Please hold. Do not hang up. Whatever you do, please stay on the line. Before we get into the absolute legal destruction of my father and his new family, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you know what it feels like to finally stop being the victim and start fighting back, you will want to hear every single detail of this takedown. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had a moment where your sadness instantly turned into pure strategy. 30 seconds later, the line clicked. Caroline. The voice was breathless, shaking, carrying the weight of 20 years of stolen time. It was a voice I had only heard in my deepest and oldest childhood memories. Hi, Mom. I said the word, feeling foreign, but incredibly right on my tongue. I am at OHare. Dad just stole my plane ticket to upgrade Sylvia's kids to first class. He told me to take an Uber home. I heard a sharp, terrifying sound on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a mother who had just been given the green light to destroy the man who took her children. Where exactly are you sitting, Caroline? Catherine's voice shifted instantly. The weeping mother vanished, replaced by the ruthless CEO who routinely dismantled multinational corporations before her morning coffee. Terminal 3, VIP Lounge. Do not move, she commanded. I am walking out of this board meeting right now. My pilot is prepping the Gulf Stream. I will be on the tarmac in Chicago in exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes. We are ending this today. Okay, I whispered. Caroline. She paused, her voice softening just a fraction. I have waited 20 years for this phone call. You have no idea what I'm about to do to him. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The gears of absolute destruction had just been set into motion. But I was not finished. The emotional shift inside me was complete. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was a forensic auditor building a federal case. And I needed my Keo counsel. I dialed my older sister Rachel. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, Caro. Aren't you supposed to be 30,000 feet in the air right now, listening to Sylvia complain about the temperature of the champagne?" Rachel asked, her voice light and cheerful. "Change of plans," I said, leaning forward in my leather chair. "Where is Jamal?" Jamal was Rachel's husband. He was a brilliant 36-year-old African-American real estate attorney who ran his own highly successful firm in downtown Chicago. Jamal had never liked my father. He saw through David's fake corporate bravado the very first time they met. Furthermore, Jamal completely despised Sylvia and her parasitic kids. He tolerated family dinners solely for my sake, always observing David with the sharp, calculating eyes of a prosecutor. "He is right here reviewing some contracts," Rachel said, her tone shifting instantly to concern. "Why? What is wrong? You sound weird." "Put him on speaker," I instructed. I heard the rustling of the phone being placed on a desk. "Caroline, talk to me." "What did David do now?" Jamal's deep, authoritative voice boomed through the speaker. "Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Dad and Sylvia just stole my plane ticket, downgraded me, and left me at the airport so Tristan and Brittany could fly first class. He tossed $100 bill at me and told me to clean Brittany's bathroom while they are in Maui. I am going to kill him." Rachel gasped in the background. I could hear a chair scraping violently against the floor. "No, we are not going to kill him," Jamal said, his voice dropping into that terrifying, icy calm he used in the courtroom when he had a hostile witness backed into a corner. "We are going to legally eviscerate him. Tell me exactly what you need me to do, Caroline." "I need you to pull the deed and the mortgage history on the house in Oak Park," I told him. The house in Oak Park was the massive 5-bedroom suburban fortress David and Sylvia lived in. It was also the house where I currently resided in the basement apartment. After my college graduation, David convinced me to co-sign the refinancing paperwork, claiming it would build my credit. In reality, he needed my pristine credit score because his was already circling the drain. Legally, Rachel and I owned 50% of that property through a trust set up during the original divorce, though David always acted like he was the sole king of the castle. "I am logging into the county registry right now," Jamal said, the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard echoing through the phone. If there was a loophole, a fraudulent signature, or a hidden lien on a property, Jamal would find it. "I also called Catherine," I added casually, as if I had not just dropped a nuclear bomb into the conversation. The keyboard clacking stopped instantly. "You called our mother." Rachel's voice trembled. "Caro, Dad said she was completely unstable. He said she—" "Dad lied." I interrupted, cutting through 2 decades of brainwashing. "Rachel, she is not an addict. She is the CEO of Sterling Ventures. She is a billionaire. Dad forged the custody papers and stole the child support she has been sending us for 20 years. I found the court records 3 years ago, but was too scared to blow up the family. Well, the family just left me at gate 24. I am done protecting him." I heard Jamal exhale a long, sharp breath. "Caroline," he said, his legal mind shifting into high gear, "if David intercepted court-ordered child support across state lines using forged signatures, that is not just a family dispute. That is federal wire fraud. That is felony embezzlement." "I know," I replied, staring out the massive lounge windows at the planes taking off. "She is flying here in her private jet right now. She will be at the signature flight terminal in less than 3 hours. "Okay, listen to me," Jamal commanded, all business now. "Rachel and I are leaving the office. We are coming to pick you up at OHare. We will meet Catherine together. In the meantime, I am pulling every single financial record attached to David's name. Give me 20 minutes. I ended the call and sank back into the leather chair. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright was beginning to level out, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I opened my laptop and connected to the lounge Wi-Fi. If Jamal was pulling the real estate records, I needed to pull the corporate ones. It was time to audit my father's entire existence. I closed my laptop and gathered my belongings. The VIP lounge suddenly felt too small for the magnitude of what was about to happen. I walked out of Terminal 3 and followed the signs toward the private aviation facility. The Chicago wind hit me as I stepped outside, but I did not feel the cold. I felt awake. Jamal and Rachel pulled up to the curb in Jamal's black SUV just as I reached the entrance. Rachel jumped out before the car was even in park. She threw her arms around me, gripping me so tightly I could barely breathe. Her eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set with fierce determination. Jamal stepped out next, adjusting his tailored suit. He gave me a brief, firm hug. He did not offer useless platitudes or apologies for my father's behavior. Jamal operated on action. "We have 30 minutes until her jet touches down," he said, checking his watch. "I have already initiated a deep background pull on every property David has touched in the last 15 years. It is a mess, Caroline. A spectacular mess." We walked into the private terminal. The contrast between the chaotic commercial gates where David had abandoned me and this luxurious space was jarring. We sat on plush leather sofas, watching the runway through floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Rachel kept holding my hand, her thumb tracing circles over my knuckles. "He told us she was a deadbeat," Rachel whispered, staring out at the gray sky. "He told us she chose drugs and strangers over her own daughters. I spent 20 years hating a woman who did not exist." "He projected his own failures onto her," I replied. "It is classic narcissistic behavior. He needed us to rely solely on him so we would never question his authority or look into his finances. If we knew Catherine was a billionaire, CEO, we would have asked why we were drowning in student loans while Sylvia bought designer handbags." A sleek silver Gulfstream descended from the clouds, cutting through the overcast Chicago sky. It touched down smoothly on the tarmac, the roar of its engines muffled by the thick glass of the terminal. The aircraft taxied directly toward our viewing area. The Sterling Ventures logo was discreetly painted on the tail. My stomach did a sudden flip. For 2 decades, the word mother was a synonym for abandonment in my mind. Now she was 50 yards away. The terminal attendant unlocked the glass doors leading out to the tarmac. We stepped out into the crisp air, just as the aircraft engines powered down. The cabin door opened and the stairs unfolded mechanically. I held my breath. Catherine Sterling stepped out into the daylight. She was 58 years old, but she radiated an intimidating, flawless power. She wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair cut in a sleek bob. There was no trace of the ragged, unhinged woman my father had described to us during our childhood. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. She stopped halfway down the stairs, her eyes locking onto Rachel and me. For a second, the billionaire CEO vanished, and she was just a mother, looking at the children who had been stolen from her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup, but she did not care. She rushed down the remaining steps. I stepped forward and she pulled me into an embrace so fierce, so desperately tight, that it knocked the breath out of me. Rachel joined us, and for the first time in 20 years, the 3 of us were together. "I have got you." Catherine sobbed into my hair, her hands shaking as she held us. "I have got you, my girls. I am so sorry I tried to find you. I never stopped trying." "We know, Mom," Rachel cried, burying her face in Catherine's shoulder. "We know." Now Jamal stood a few feet away, giving us the moment, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes scanning the perimeter like a bodyguard. When the tears finally subsided and we pulled back, Catherine wiped her eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by the terrifying composure of a woman who destroyed corporate empires before lunch. She looked at Jamal. "You must be the lawyer, son-in-law my investigators told me about." Jamal smiled, a sharp, dangerous grin. "Jamal, it is an honor, Catherine. I have already pulled the deeds." "It is worse than we thought." Catherine nodded, her eyes hardening as she looked back at me. Let us get inside the terminal. We have a lot of lost time to cover, and I brought receipts. We followed her to a private conference room inside the facility. Catherine gestured to her assistant, who had silently followed her off the plane. The assistant placed a thick leather-bound portfolio on the mahogany table. Catherine opened it and pushed it toward Rachel and me. "I want you to see this first," Catherine said, her voice remarkably steady. "David told you I abandoned you. He told you I never paid a dime in child support. Look at tab 1. I flipped open the heavy cover. Inside were dozens of bank statements dating back 2 decades. Every single month, a wire transfer of $5,000 left Catherine's account and went directly into a trust David controlled. Beside the statements were copies of canceled checks endorsed with David's signature. He took it all. Rachel gasped, trailing her finger over a particularly large transfer from 10 years ago. This was right when I was begging him to help me with my law school tuition. He said he was broke. He used that exact transfer to buy Sylvia's engagement ring, I noted, comparing the date to my memory of their engagement timeline. He funded his entire second marriage with our child support. Now look at tab 2. Catherine instructed, her gaze turning icy. "Before we dive into these court records, I want us secured in my aircraft." Catherine instructed, her gaze turning icy. "The terminal is private, but my jet is a fortress. We have ground to cover, and I want complete confidentiality while Jamal cross-references these files with his legal databases. Grab the portfolio, girls." We walked up the steps of the Gulf Stream. The interior was breathtaking, featuring cream leather seats and advanced secure communication screens. The flight attendant secured the cabin door, and we settled into the plush seats. Jamal immediately opened his laptop, connecting to the aircraft's encrypted Wi-Fi network. He pulled up property records while Rachel and I stared at the heavy, leather-bound portfolio. "Open tab 2, Catherine said as she poured a glass of sparkling water. I turned the thick parchment divider. Inside lay official court decrees from 20 years ago. The first document was an emergency custody modification order. I scanned the legal jargon, my auditor training instantly highlighting the discrepancies. He filed for sole custody, claiming you were a flight risk and a danger to us. Rachel read aloud, her hands trembling. He submitted sworn affidavits saying you had vanished to a rehabilitation center in Nevada. It was a complete fabrication, Catherine stated, her voice razor-sharp. I had traveled to Europe for a 30-day period to secure the funding that launched Sterling Ventures. David knew exactly where I was. But he hired a lawyer who specialized in exploiting legal loopholes. They submitted forged admission papers from a fictitious clinic. He bribed a notary to sign off on documents stating I voluntarily surrendered my parental rights. By the time I returned, the emergency order was granted. "Why did not you fight it?" I asked, looking at the forged signature that looked nothing like my mother's elegant script. "I spent 5 years and millions fighting it," Catherine replied. "But David dragged it out in local courts, manipulating judges and claiming my sudden wealth made me a target who would endanger you. He convinced the court that keeping you in his stable suburban environment was safer. And then he made a deal. He offered to drop a highly damaging fabricated smear campaign against my company if I agreed to pay him exorbitant child support and stay away. I paid him to ensure you were both provided for. I thought the money was securing your future." I pulled out my own laptop and placed it next to the portfolio. Forensic auditor mode fully engaged. I needed to see exactly where that money went. I opened the financial statements and began typing the routing numbers into my tracing software. "The child support was $5,000 a month," I said, staring at the screen, "plus a $50,000 annual bonus designated for our college tuition. Over 20 years, that is well over $2 million. Rachel gasped. "I took out $70,000 in student loans for law school. I am still paying them off. He told me I had to finance it myself because his company was barely surviving." I traced the routing numbers. The money did not go into a standard family checking account. David funneled every single cent of Catherine's child support into a private LLC, registered under the name Oak Park Holdings. Jamal looked up from his screen. Oak Park Holdings is a shell company, Caroline. David is listed as the sole proprietor. Sylvia was added as a signatory exactly 1 month after they got married. I started pulling the expenditure reports for the shell company. The anger I felt at the airport was nothing compared to the fury boiling in my veins right now. Line by line, the financial truth of my entire childhood revealed itself. "Here is your law school tuition, Rachel," I said, pointing to a block of expenses from 10 years ago. $40,000 withdrawn and immediately transferred to a luxury car dealership. He bought Sylvia's Mercedes with your tuition money. Rachel covered her mouth, a stifled sob escaping her throat. I kept scrolling. The evidence of their parasitic lifestyle was staggering. Here is the country club initiation fee. Here are the monthly charges for boutique designer clothing stores where Sylvia shops. Here is Tristan and Brittany's private high school tuition. Every luxury they ever threw in our faces every time they mocked us, they were doing it while spending our money. Catherine watched my screen, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might shatter. He took the money meant for your futures and used it to elevate his new wife and her children. He built a kingdom on stolen gold. I scrolled down to the transactions from the past 48 hours to see how they funded the Hawaii trip. My blood ran cold when I saw the matching numbers. "Look at this," I told Jamal, sliding my laptop toward him. 2 days ago, there was a withdrawal of exactly $4,000 from the shell company. The memo line says airline upgrades. Jamal analyzed the data. He used the last remaining funds in the trust, the money Catherine specifically designated as an emergency medical fund for you and Rachel, to purchase those first-class tickets. He did not just cancel my coach ticket, I realized. He used my emergency medical fund to buy Tristan and Brittany's first-class seats. He threw a $100 bill at me from a bank account that belonged entirely to my mother. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. David and Sylvia had lived a 20-year lie. They convinced me I was worthless while secretly surviving solely on my value. Jamal leaned back in his leather chair, closing his eyes before opening them with the lethal focus of a top-tier attorney. "Caroline, the embezzlement and the forgery are state crimes. But funneling money across state lines using a dummy corporation to hide the source of the funds changes the game entirely." "What does it mean?" Catherine asked, her voice dangerously calm. "It means," Jamal smiled grimly, "we are not just looking at a civil suit for stolen child support. We are looking at massive federal tax evasion. We are looking at wire fraud. David is not just going to lose his reputation, he is going to lose his freedom. And that is not even the worst of it," Jamal continued, turning his laptop toward us. "While you were tracing the shell company, I pulled the mortgage history on the Oak Park house. You know, the house where David let you live in the basement, Caroline. The house you co-signed for to help him out." "What did you find?" I asked, bracing myself for the next blow. Jamal pointed to a freshly filed county record. "David did not just refinance the house. He took out a massive second mortgage against it exactly 3 weeks ago. He pulled out $400,000 in pure cash equity without your knowledge. But I never signed anything for a second mortgage," I stated firmly. "As a co-signer, my signature and physical presence are legally required for any new liens or encumbrances on that property. I have not stepped foot inside a bank in months. That is because the signature on this notarized document belongs to a Caroline, but it is absolutely not your handwriting," Jamal replied. "The curves are wrong and the pressure indicates hesitation. It is a very sloppy forgery. David forged your signature on a federal bank loan to secure a massive cash injection. He committed mortgage fraud. And I know exactly where that $400,000 went because the paper trail connects directly back to his failing business. This was the absolute final piece of evidence we needed to completely obliterate his life. This was the absolute final piece of evidence we needed to completely obliterate his life." I stared at the screen as Jamal immediately reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out his secondary tablet. He set it up on the mahogany table of the jet and initiated a secure video call to his law firm. He was bypassing standard channels and going straight to his top title investigator, Elias. The encrypted connection linked within seconds, revealing a sharp-looking man sitting in a high-tech office, surrounded by dual monitors. Elias, I need an emergency pull on a recent closing. Jamal ordered, his voice projecting absolute authority. Oak Park property. David executed a cash-out refinance exactly 21 days ago. I need the remote online notarization logs, the IP addresses, and if they used a digital closing room, I want the video file, now. Elias did not waste time with pleasantries. You got it, boss. Give me 90 seconds. I am accessing the county portal and routing through the title underwriter server. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the tablet. Remote online notarization, she asked. Jamal nodded, keeping his gaze fixed on the screen. Since the pandemic, most banks allow borrowers to close on mortgages digitally. The catch is that the notary is required by federal law to record the entire video session and verify government-issued identification. If David forged Caroline's signature on a second mortgage, he had to bypass the video verification somehow. I felt a chill run down my spine. Dad knows I work long hours. He could easily intercept my mail at the house, but how could he fake my physical presence on a video call? We are about to find out, Jamal said grimly. Elias reappeared on the screen. I have the file, Jamal. The lender was First National. They used a third-party vendor for the digital closing. Sending the video file to your secure drive right now. Oh, and you are going to want to see the IP address log. Jamal opened the incoming file and mirrored his tablet to the large flat screen mounted on the bulkhead of the Gulfstream cabin. We all watched as a sterile digital waiting room appeared on the screen. A notary public popped into the frame asking all parties to activate their cameras. The primary borrower window showed David sitting in his home office looking incredibly smug. The secondary borrower window labeled with my name remained entirely black. Mr. Borrower, the notary stated over the audio, I need the co-signer to activate her camera for visual identification. I am so sorry about that, David said smoothly, flashing his signature charismatic smile. My daughter Caroline is a forensic auditor, and she is currently on a highly restricted corporate network. Her firm disables webcam access for security protocols. However, I have her original passport and her dual authentication token right here. She is listening on audio. Then a voice that was supposed to be mine spoke through the black screen. Yes, I am here. I consent to the terms. Rachel gasped, grabbing my arm. That is not you. I stared at the screen in pure disbelief. That is Brittany. My 24-year-old stepsister was impersonating me on a federal bank loan closing. She was pitching her voice down, trying to mimic my professional tone. David then held up my actual expired passport to the camera, claiming it was my current one. He must have dug it out of my old tax boxes in the basement. Elias Jamal said over the video call, Pull the IP address for the secondary borrower. Where did that audio connection originate from? Already on it, boss, Elias replied, typing rapidly. The IP address pings back to a local coffee shop less than 2 miles from the Oak Park house. Brittany was sitting in a Starbucks logging into a federal financial portal committing identity theft. This is staggering, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He involved his stepdaughter in a federal crime. Jamal terminated the video playback and looked directly at me. Caroline, this elevates everything. Bank fraud and mortgage fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code carry a maximum penalty of 30 years in federal prison. And because they conspired to do it together using electronic communications, we are adding wire fraud and conspiracy to commit identity theft to the list. I processed the legal ramifications with cold, calculating precision. They stole $400,000 in equity from a home I legally co-own. But why? David is cheap, but he is not stupid. Risking decades in federal prison just to fund a vacation to Hawaii makes no sense. I pulled my laptop closer, running the accounting software Vanguard Partners used for corporate acquisitions. I took the $400,000 figure and began cross-referencing it with the preliminary audit files David had submitted for his company merger. It took me exactly 4 minutes to find the smoking gun. I found it! I announced, my fingers flying across the keyboard. He did not use the mortgage money for the vacation. He used the stolen child support for the vacation. The $400,000 from the mortgage fraud went straight into Apex Materials. Rachel leaned over my shoulder looking at the complex spreadsheets. Why would he put personal stolen money into a failing business? Because he is trying to artificially inflate his cash reserves. I explained, highlighting a series of fraudulent corporate deposits. Apex Materials is bankrupt. If he files for bankruptcy, he loses his CEO status, his salary, and his entire social standing. To secure a buyout from Vanguard Partners and Sterling Ventures, his company needs to show liquidity. He funneled the stolen home equity into the corporate accounts and disguised it as client revenue. Catherine let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He is attempting to defraud my venture capital firm, using funds he stole from my daughter's house. The sheer arrogance is almost impressive. Jamal closed his tablet, the snap echoing loudly in the luxurious cabin. He just crossed the line from a domestic dispute into the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Caroline, if Vanguard relies on those manipulated financial statements to approve a merger, it becomes massive corporate fraud. I am the lead forensic auditor assigned to the Apex Materials file. I reminded them, a predatory smile finally touching my lips. I have the unilateral authority to flag the file for federal review. Vanguard policy dictates that any discovery of fraudulent cash infusion must be reported to the authorities immediately to protect the firm from liability. So we are not just suing him, Rachel asked, her eyes wide with realization. No, Catherine answered, her gaze fixed on the runway outside. We are going to bury him. Jamal, I want injunctions filed by Monday morning. I want every bank account tied to David Sylvia and Oak Park Holdings frozen immediately. Consider it done, Catherine. Jamal replied, matching her ruthless energy. I will draft the emergency asset freeze, utilizing the evidence of the forged mortgage. Once the bank realizes they issued a fraudulent loan, they will lock down his accounts immediately. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee. I looked at the flight tracker on the monitor above us. David and his new perfect family were currently 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward their luxury resort, completely oblivious to the fact that their financial empire had just been reduced to ashes. The dominoes were perfectly lined up. Now it was time to knock them down. Jamal opened his phone and sent a rapid sequence of encrypted messages to his paralegal team. I need the draft for the federal injunction on my desk in 1 hour. We are moving faster than standard protocol. Catherine uncrossed her legs and stood up, adjusting her charcoal blazer. Excellent. The corporate fraud is secured and the federal charges are inevitable. But I am not waiting for the FBI to deliver the first consequence. David abandoned you at an airport, Caroline. He made you feel like you had no home to return to. So we are going to make sure he is the one without a home. I looked up at my mother, completely tracking her strategic shift. What is the next move? Jamal smirked, tucking his tablet under his arm. You heard the billionaire. We are going to Oak Park. It is time to clear out your room and change the locks. Before we tear down the suburban fortress, I need to lock down the corporate servers, I told Jamal as we descended the stairs of the private jet. If David's cowardly accountant gets spooked by any automated alerts, when you freeze the personal accounts, they might start shredding the Apex Materials files. We have to secure the physical and digital evidence at my office first to make the federal case completely bulletproof. Catherine nodded, her sharp eyes gleaming with approval. A smart auditor leaves zero loose ends. Driver, take us to Vanguard Partners. The ride into downtown Chicago was a blur of steel and glass. Sitting in the back of the armored SUV, I watched the city skyline approach. For years, I had commuted into this financial district, feeling like an imposter carrying the weight of my family's constant disapproval. Today, I returned as the architect of their downfall. We bypassed the weekend security desk at the Vanguard Partners high-rise. My clearance badge granted us immediate access to the secure executive elevators. As we rode up to the 42nd floor, Jamal briefed Catherine on the exact legal mechanisms he was deploying to freeze the bank accounts. I listened to them speak an effortless symphony of high-level legal and corporate strategy. This was my real family, brilliant, calculating, and fiercely protective. The elevator doors chimed open, revealing the silent, polished corridors of Vanguard partners. The weekend stillness of the office worked perfectly to our advantage. I led Catherine and Jamal through the glass partitions straight to the secure audit terminal in my department. I swiped my keycard and logged into the mainframe. I had seen the preliminary digital files on the jet, but now I needed the full unredacted acquisition dossier. When Vanguard considers buying out a struggling company, they demand total access to the target's internal servers. David had willingly handed over the keys to his kingdom because he was desperate for a bailout. I opened the master folder labeled Apex Materials Acquisition Proposal. Let us see exactly how hard he is begging, I murmured, my fingers flying across the illuminated keyboard. As the full prospectus populated on my dual monitors, the sheer scale of his desperation became undeniable. David had submitted a 60-page merger request directly to Catherine's venture capital firm. He had no idea his ex-wife was the primary stakeholder behind the corporate entity listed on the paperwork. The document was a masterclass in fiction. He pitched Apex Materials as an innovative supply chain leader on the verge of massive expansion, needing only a minor capital injection to dominate the Midwest market. Look at these projected revenue models, Jamal said, leaning over my right shoulder. He is claiming a 20% year-over-year growth. It is completely fabricated, I replied, pulling up the raw ledger data side by side with his submitted proposal. He is booking future unconfirmed orders as current cash on hand. And here is where he hid the stolen equity from my house. He classified the $400,000 fraudulent mortgage injection as an anonymous angel investment to make his balance sheet look healthy. Catherine stood behind my left shoulder, tracing the lines of data with her eyes. He is trying to secure a $10 million buyout based on manipulated assets, she said, her voice dangerously calm. He intends to take the buyout cash, pay off his hidden personal debts, and leave my firm holding an empty shell of a company. It is textbook corporate sabotage. I kept digging, bypassing the polished presentation layers and diving directly into the raw expense accounts. The deeper I went, the more disgusting the reality became. David was not just stealing from me to fund Sylvia's lavish lifestyle. He was bleeding his own employees dry. He canceled the company health insurance match program 6 months ago, citing poor market conditions. I pointed out, highlighting the abrupt drop in employee benefit payouts. But in that exact same week, he authorized a corporate expense for Tristan. Tristan does not even work there, Rachel argued, her voice rising with disgust as she watched the screen. He does on paper, I replied, pulling up the payroll registry. David listed Tristan as a senior logistics consultant with a base salary of $90,000 a year. The kid who cannot even wake up before noon is drawing a massive corporate salary while the actual warehouse workers lose their health coverage. And Brittany is listed as a marketing director receiving monthly stipends for a company-leased vehicle. It was a complete parasitic drain. My father had turned his mid-sized company into a personal piggy bank for his new wife's children while leaving his actual employees to suffer. And he was attempting to package this rotting corpse of a business and sell it to my mother. I have seen enough, Catherine stated, stepping back from the monitors. Caroline, what is the exact protocol for a Vanguard auditor who discovers federal fraud during an active acquisition assessment? I initiate a hard lockdown, I answered. I file a red flag submission to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Once I hit submit, the system locks the target company out of their own servers to prevent the destruction of evidence. Vanguard legally withdraws from the merger and hands the dossier over to federal prosecutors. Do it, Jamal commanded. I took a deep breath. My entire life, David had commanded me to shrink, to be quiet, to accept his scraps while he funded his fake empire. He told me I was a failure because I chose to be an auditor instead of a flashy executive. Now the very skills he mocked were about to seal his fate. I opened the compliance portal, attached the compiled evidence files, the forged mortgage signature, the fake payroll records, and the false revenue projections. I typed a concise, ruthless summary of the wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. My finger hovered over the submit button. There was no going back after this. David would be arrested. His company would be seized. The fake reality he and Sylvia enjoyed would instantly shatter. I pressed enter. A green confirmation banner flashed across the screen. Federal submission confirmed. File locked. The silent office felt incredibly loud in that moment. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 12 years old. The financial execution was complete. The authorities had the bait and David's corporate life was officially over. Jamal checked his watch. The automated system just notified the banks. The asset freeze will take effect in approximately 15 minutes. His credit cards are about to turn into useless pieces of plastic. Catherine smiled, a sharp, victorious expression that mirrored my own. Perfect. Now that the corporate trash is taken care of, let us go deal with the residential trash. I logged out of the terminal and grabbed my coat. The emotional closure I needed was not just in these digital files. It was in the physical space where they had made me feel like an unwelcome ghost for years. We took the elevator down to the waiting SUV. The Chicago traffic parted for us as we merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the suburbs. The drive to Oak Park felt entirely different from my usual commute. I was not returning to my cramped basement apartment to hide from my step-siblings. I was returning as the rightful owner of the property, armed with a top-tier attorney, a billionaire mother, and a heart completely devoid of mercy. Let us go change some locks, I said as the suburban neighborhood finally came into view. The armored SUV rolled to a smooth stop in the expansive driveway of the Oak Park house. Before anyone reached for a door handle, Jamal raised his hand, holding up his secondary tablet. The glow from the screen illuminated his sharp features. "We are not going inside just yet," he announced, his voice dropping into that familiar calculating register. The federal submission locked down David's corporate accounts, but Elias just cracked the encrypted layer of the Oak Park Holdings shell company. "We need to conduct a full forensic audit of the physical assets right here, right now." I pulled my laptop out of my bag and synced it to Jamal's secure network. Catherine leaned forward from the back seat, her eyes narrowed in absolute focus. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked. "We are looking for the embezzlement trail," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard as the raw financial ledgers populated on my screen. David did not just steal your child support and take out a fraudulent second mortgage. He had to wash that cash. He funneled it through his failing supply company, using fake vendor invoices to make it look like legitimate business expenses. But the money did not disappear into thin air. It morphed into physical assets. If we can prove those assets were purchased with stolen funds, Jamal can attach them to the federal injunction. Jamal nodded precisely. Which means when we go inside, we are not just changing the locks. We are legally repossessing every single luxury item Sylvia and her entitled kids think they own. The forensic audit began in the quiet confines of the SUV. I bypassed the superficial tax returns and went straight into the raw bank statements Elias had extracted. I opened the file labeled Vendor Disbursements for the last 3 fiscal years. As a forensic auditor, my brain is trained to spot anomalies in data patterns. Genuine corporate expenses have a distinct rhythm. David's books were a chaotic symphony of fraud. "Look at this." I pointed to a recurring line item. Apex Materials paid a vendor called Sapphire Logistics $20,000 a month for consulting fees. But the tax identification number for Sapphire Logistics matches a high-end interior design firm in downtown Chicago. Jamal cross-referenced the dates on his tablet. That perfectly aligns with the massive kitchen and living room renovation Sylvia bragged about on social media 2 years ago. He used corporate funds disguised as consulting fees to remodel the house. I highlighted the transactions, marking them for seizure. The deeper we dug, the more disgusting the financial web became. I pulled up the fleet vehicle expense reports. A mid-sized supply company should be leasing delivery trucks or basic sedans for sales representatives. Instead, I found 3 separate lease agreements for luxury vehicles. Tristan's BMW is listed as a corporate transport vehicle. I noted disgust thick in my voice. And Brittany's Range Rover is registered under the company as a promotional asset. He is writing off their luxury cars as tax deductions while utilizing the stolen child support to make the down payments. Catherine let out a harsh, humorless laugh from the back seat. He essentially stole from his own daughters to finance the illusion of wealth for his stepchildren. He is truly a masterclass in pathetic entitlement. We kept tearing through the cooked books. Every lavish detail of their lives was built on a foundation of felony theft. I found a wire transfer for $85,000 flagged as an international vendor payment. I ran the routing number through my tracing software. The receiving institution was not a manufacturing supplier in Asia. It was an elite private diamond broker in Geneva. Sylvia's 10-carat anniversary ring. I realized my stomach turning. I remember the dinner party where David gave it to her. He stood up and gave a speech about how hard he had worked to provide his wife with the very best. He practically cried talking about his own dedication. Jamal typed furiously into the legal portal. The ring is a tangible asset purchased with embezzled funds. I am adding it to the seizure order right now. The moment she returns, we have the legal right to demand she hand it over or face immediate arrest for possession of stolen property. The audit revealed a staggering level of arrogance. David believed he was a financial genius because he had successfully hidden his crimes from his local accountant. But his methods were sloppy and amateurish against the scrutiny of a top-tier corporate auditor. He used basic circular transfers, moving money from the fake trust to the shell company, to the corporate accounts, and then directly to his personal credit cards. He left a digital footprint so wide and deep, it was practically screaming for a federal indictment. Every single thing they own is stolen, I stated, leaning back against the leather seat of the SUV. The clothes in their closets, the cars in the driveway, the jewelry in their safes. None of it is real. We have the federal warrant. Jamal announced, a predatory smile spreading across his face. The Oak Park house is officially considered a crime scene containing illicitly acquired assets. Since you and Rachel are the lawful co-owners of the property, we have the legal authority to secure the premises and repossess the stolen items on behalf of the holding trust. Catherine adjusted her charcoal blazer and opened the door of the SUV. The cool suburban air rushed into the vehicle. She looked at the sprawling 5-bedroom house that had been funded by her stolen money. It stood quiet and perfectly manicured, hiding the ugly truth behind its pristine brick facade. "Let us go collect my money," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "And let us erase them from this house." I grabbed my laptop and walked up the driveway. The physical eviction was about to begin. I unlocked the front door using the key I had kept hidden on my keychain for years. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the grand foyer. The vaulted ceilings and custom chandeliers screamed generational wealth, but the reality was nothing more than a suburban crime scene. Catherine stepped over the threshold, her designer heels clicking sharply against the imported marble floor. She looked around the pristine staged living room with clinical disgust. "This entire house is a monument to his mediocrity," Catherine stated, running a hand along a velvet sofa. "He could not build his own success, so he stole mine and dressed his new family in it." Jamal pulled out a stack of bright red evidence tags from his briefcase. "We are classifying this as an active asset seizure," he announced. "Caroline, you have the audit logs. We need to match the physical inventory to the fraudulent invoices we pulled. Tag every single item purchased with embezzled funds. Once tagged, it becomes federal evidence. If they try to move or sell any of it, they catch a destruction of evidence charge." I opened my laptop, balancing it on my forearm as we walked toward the attached 3-car garage. This was where Tristan parked his pride and joy. I hit the wall switch, revealing the gleaming midnight blue BMW sedan sitting in the center bay. It was the car he constantly flaunted on his social media accounts, claiming he bought it with his own crypto investments. I cross-referenced the vehicle identification number with the corporate lease agreements I had downloaded from Apex Materials. "Here's the exact match," I said, reading the data aloud. David leased this BMW under the company name, classifying it as a heavy-duty transport vehicle for the logistics department. He used the stolen home equity cash to pay the upfront signing fee. Then he set up automated monthly payments from the corporate account, labeling them as warehouse equipment maintenance. Jamal slapped a red evidence tag onto the driver's window. Seized. If Tristan tries to start the engine, he is committing grand theft auto. We moved back inside, heading straight up the sweeping staircase to the master suite. This was Sylvia's sanctuary. The woman had treated me like a peasant my entire life, sneering at my modest clothes. I kicked open the door to her massive walk-in closet. It was the size of my entire basement apartment. The walls were lined with custom shelving, holding rows of designer handbags, stilettos, and silk garments. It was a highly organized ledger of felony theft. I pulled up the vendor disbursement file labeled Client Appreciation and Promotional Materials. May 12th of last year, I announced, looking at the screen. Apex Materials reported a $12,000 expense for corporate branding materials. Catherine walked over to a glass display case. She reached in and pulled out a pristine limited edition Hermes Birkin bag. She checked the interior authentication tag and tossed the bag onto the center island. A $12,000 handbag purchased directly from a private dealer, she noted. The dates align perfectly. August 3rd. I read off another line. David booked an $8,000 expense for executive team building retreats. Jamal opened a velvet-lined jewelry drawer. He pulled out 2 diamond tennis bracelets and a heavy gold Cartier watch. He dropped them next to the handbag. Tag them all. I walked down the rows of clothing, pulling up the Shell Company credit card statements. Sylvia had used a corporate card tied to the fraudulent child support trust to fund weekly shopping sprees. I matched a string of $2,000 charges at an exclusive boutique to a rack of unworn designer coats, still bearing their price tags. The family facade was completely crumbling under the heavy weight of the raw data. Everything they used to project superiority was paid for with my money and my mother's money. Sylvia had mocked my frugal lifestyle while literally wearing the funds meant for my college education. Tristan had called me a loser while driving a car, financed by the illegal mortgage on my home. Brittany acted like social royalty while actively committing identity theft. They were a ring of well-dressed thieves living on stolen time. We spent the next hour systematically dismantling their fake empire. We tagged the custom home theater system in the basement, which David had written off as presentation equipment. We tagged the expensive photography gear in Brittany's room, which she used to build her fake influencer lifestyle, all billed to Apex Materials, as marketing research tools. With every red tag we applied, the stark reality of their situation became crystal clear. They owned absolutely nothing. Their entire existence was a fragile house of cards ready to collapse. And I was the hurricane they never saw coming. Jamal finished applying the last evidence sticker to a flat-screen television. The physical inventory reconciliation is complete, he announced. The sheer volume of embezzled assets confirms the federal wire fraud charges. The SEC and the FBI will have a field day with this documentation. Catherine stood looking at the sea of red tags covering the furniture, electronics, and artwork. This covers the stolen assets, she said, her voice sharp. But we still need to execute the eviction. Caroline, you lived in the basement while they hoarded this stolen wealth upstairs. It is time to clear out your space entirely. I looked at the red tags, knowing that when David and Sylvia returned from their Hawaiian vacation, they would walk into a legally sealed trap. They would find their luxury cars, seize their designer clothes tagged as federal evidence, and their bank accounts frozen solid. I slowly turned toward the basement door, ready to pack up my entire life. Let us go right now. I want my room completely empty before we set the final legal trap. I gripped the railing and descended the narrow wooden stairs into the basement apartment. For years, this cramped, dimly lit space had been my entire world. David had shoved me down here under the guise of giving me independence after college. In reality, he simply wanted me out of sight, so Sylvia and her precious children could command the upper floors without having to look at the daughter who actually funded their existence. I grabbed 2 large canvas duffel bags from the closet and began tossing my clothes into them. I did not fold anything. Speed was the priority. Rachel helped me clear the small desk, throwing my notebooks and spare chargers into a cardboard box. Catherine stood near the small window, her expression a mixture of profound sorrow and simmering rage. She watched me dismantle the meager life her stolen millions had supposedly paid for. I zipped the second duffel bag shut and hoisted it onto my shoulder. "That is it," I announced, looking around the bare walls. "Every trace of my existence down here is gone." I carried the bags up the stairs with Rachel following behind. We stacked my belongings near the front door, where Jamal was already organizing a massive stack of legal documents on the foyer table. He arranged the physical printouts into a thick black binder that looked more like a federal indictment than a simple family dispute. I set my bags down and walked over to him. "Is the digital package ready?" I asked, pulling my laptop from my tote bag to confirm the final encryption. Jamal nodded, tapping the cover of the binder. "The physical copies are here, but the digital transmission is what will trigger the immediate raid." I compiled the wire fraud evidence, the fake vendor invoices, and the forged mortgage documentation into a single secure file. Because the fraudulent loan crossed state lines during the digital closing process, it falls under the purview of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. I opened my terminal and verified the file path. As a forensic auditor, I knew exactly which department needed to receive this data to bypass the usual bureaucratic delays. I routed the secure package directly to a contact I had worked with on previous corporate embezzlement cases. The evidence was irrefutable. It showed a clear, deliberate pattern of stealing court-ordered child support, laundering it through a shell company, and using stolen equity to artificially inflate corporate revenue for a merger. I typed out the formal tip-off memo detailing the exact penal codes David had violated: wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft. It read like a masterclass in how to guarantee a 20-year prison sentence. I hit send. The progress bar flashed across the screen, confirming the secure transmission to the federal database. The FBI now has everything Jamal stated, checking his phone as an automated receipt pinged in his inbox. They will assign an agent by Monday morning. The moment David attempts to use a frozen credit card or access his locked corporate server, the system will flag his location. But we are not going to make them hunt him down. We are going to serve him right here in his own living room. I took the heavy black binder from Jamal and walked back down the hallway toward the master suite. This was where the final piece of the trap needed to be set. I stepped into David and Sylvia's immaculate bedroom. The king-sized bed was perfectly made, covered in a ridiculously expensive silk duvet that my mother had unknowingly paid for. I placed the binder squarely in the center of the bed. Inside that binder was every bank statement, every fake invoice, and a copy of the federal mortgage fraud report. But I needed a cover letter. I needed David to understand exactly who had orchestrated his absolute ruin. I pulled a pen from my pocket and grabbed a piece of heavy cardstock from Sylvia's vanity desk. I did not write a long emotional letter about my stolen childhood. I did not ask why I was never good enough. A forensic auditor does not beg for closure. They deliver facts. I wrote a single concise paragraph. "Dad, I audited the shell company. I audited the fake supply vendors. I flagged the corporate merger for federal review, and I tracked the child support you stole from my mother. You told me to order an Uber. I ordered a federal investigation instead. Your bank accounts are frozen, and the FBI has the forged mortgage documents. Enjoy your flight home. Caroline." I placed the cardstock directly on top of the black binder. It was the perfect visual anchor for the hurricane that was about to hit them. Catherine walked into the bedroom and looked at the binder sitting on the silk duvet. "It is a masterpiece," she murmured, her lips curving into a cold, satisfied smile. "He is going to walk into this house expecting to find a subdued, obedient daughter scrubbing the floors. Instead, he is going to find a federal crime scene." Rachel joined us in the doorway, holding a set of brand-new brass keys. "Jamal and I just finished changing the locks on the exterior doors," she announced, tossing the old keys into a nearby trash can. The only way they are getting inside when they return from Hawaii is by breaking a window or calling a locksmith. And since their accounts are frozen, they will not be able to pay for either. The trap was flawlessly set. Every financial exit was blocked. Every asset was tagged for seizure. Every lie David had told was neatly documented and handed over to federal prosecutors. The suburban fortress he had built to impress his country club friends was now a locked cage waiting for his return. I looked around the silent house one last time, feeling an incredible sense of power. "Let us go," I said. "We have a party to plan." We stepped out of the heavy oak front door, and the crisp Chicago afternoon air immediately rushed over me. As I pulled the door shut behind us, the new brass lock clicked into place with a heavy, satisfying thud. The physical boundary was officially drawn, but the legal perimeter was just arriving. A white sedan with the county seal prominently emblazoned on the side pulled into the circular driveway, stopping right behind Catherine's armored SUV. Two court-appointed officers stepped out of the vehicle holding thick manila envelopes. Jamal had not just submitted digital paperwork. He had leveraged his considerable influence in the local legal community to expedite the emergency asset freeze and secure a temporary seizure order on the property. He walked down the front steps to meet the officers, flashing his credentials and exchanging a few sharp professional words. Rachel and I stood on the manicured lawn, watching as the officers approached the house. This was the true psychological breakdown of the family safe haven. For over a decade, the sprawling suburban mansion had been David's ultimate weapon. He used the vaulted ceilings, the custom kitchen, and the gated driveway to intimidate anyone who questioned his authority. He wielded this house to make me feel small, isolating me in a damp basement apartment while demanding absolute gratitude for the privilege of living under his roof. Sylvia had used this property to host lavish dinner parties, elevating her social status among the neighborhood elite while treating me like the hired help. Now the pristine facade was crumbling in broad daylight. The court officers systematically began taping brightly colored legal notices directly to the front door and the garage panels. The documents featured bold, black lettering declaring the property an active asset seizure tied to an ongoing federal investigation. The notices explicitly stated that entry by unauthorized personnel, including the former residents, would result in immediate arrest for trespassing and evidence tampering. I watched the official seal being pressed against the custom stained glass of the entryway. The house was no longer a home, it was an exhibit. It was a tangible monument to David's arrogance, and it had just been legally condemned. Rachel wrapped her arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. She looked up at the second-story window of the master suite where we had just left the explosive audit binder sitting on the silk duvet. "They are going to lose their minds when they pull up and see those stickers on the door," Rachel said, a fierce, triumphant edge to her voice. "Sylvia will probably try to claw the paper off with her bare hands before the neighbors see." Speaking of the neighbors, I gestured toward the property line. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip who lived across the street, was currently standing on her front porch pretending to water a hanging fern. Her eyes were locked onto the court officers, and her phone was already pressed to her ear. In a neighborhood where image was the only currency that mattered, the sight of legal seizure notices being plastered across David's front door was absolute social ruin. By dinner time, the entire country club would know that the prestigious CEO was facing severe legal trouble. Jamal finished signing the service documents and shook hands with the officers. He walked back over to us, slipping his gold pen into his suit pocket. "The perimeter is legally secured," Jamal announced, his dark eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "The federal asset freeze is officially active. David's shell company accounts are locked. His personal credit cards will decline on his next purchase, and this property cannot be accessed, sold, or leveraged. He is completely financially paralyzed." Catherine stood by the SUV watching the officers drive away. Her posture remained flawless, but I could see the profound emotional release in her shoulders. She had waited 20 years to tear down the man who had stolen her daughters and weaponized her own money against her. She walked over and gently touched my cheek. "You did brilliantly today, Caroline. You took the very skills he mocked and used them to dismantle his entire world. Now it is time for us to regroup. Where are we going? I asked, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion threatening to overtake my adrenaline. We are going to my hotel, Catherine replied, gesturing for the driver to open the doors of the SUV. I leased the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons for the month. We need a secure command center to monitor the fallout when David tries to use his credit cards in Hawaii. Plus, we have 20 years of catching up to do, and I intend to do it over exceptional room service. I climbed into the back of the SUV, letting the heavy armored door shut the suburban neighborhood away. As the driver pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the house one last time. The red evidence tags we had placed on the luxury cars in the garage and the designer handbags in the closet were invisible from the street, but I knew they were there. The house was a loaded trap, waiting to snap shut on the very people who had designed it. The ride to downtown Chicago felt entirely different than the journey out to Oak Park. I sat between my sister and the billionaire mother I had been told was a monster. We spent the drive connecting the missing pieces of our past. Catherine explained how David had meticulously blocked her emails, intercepted her letters, and threatened legal action whenever she tried to send private investigators to find us. She had built her venture capital firm from the ground up, channeling her grief into corporate dominance, always hoping her success would eventually provide the resources to break through David's legal barricades. "You never stopped fighting for us," Rachel said, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "He made us believe we were completely unwanted." "I wanted you every single second of every single day," Catherine stated fiercely. "And I am going to make sure he pays for every lie he planted in your heads." The SUV pulled up to the private entrance of the Four Seasons. We bypassed the main lobby, entirely utilizing a dedicated elevator that shot straight up to the penthouse level. The doors opened to reveal a sprawling luxury suite with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. It was a space designed for power and comfort, a stark contrast to the dark, damp basement I had woken up in just 24 hours ago. Jamal immediately set up his laptop on the massive marble dining table, creating our tactical command station. "The federal tip-off has been acknowledged by the regional field office," he reported, pulling up a secure dashboard. "The SEC has flagged the Vanguard merger proposal. The dominoes are falling exactly as we planned." "Now we wait," I said, sinking into a plush velvet sofa. I pulled out my phone, placing it on the table. My device was the only tether David had left to his previous life. When the financial blockades hit him in paradise, he would undoubtedly reach out to the daughter he thought he had successfully discarded. The psychological breakdown of his safe haven was complete. Next came the breakdown of the man himself. But before David even realized his credit cards were frozen, I had one final extraction to execute. Throwing clothes into 2 duffel bags had been the initial extraction, but a true forensic auditor leaves absolutely zero trace behind. From the command center at the hotel, I opened a secure application on my laptop. I had authorized a premier moving and remediation crew to enter the Oak Park property under Jamal's strict legal supervision. They were tasked with executing the final phase of my physical eviction. I was not just moving out. I was erasing my existence from David's world entirely. I watched the live feed from the temporary security cameras Jamal's team had placed in the foyer. A crew of 6 professionals descended into the basement. They packed up my modest furniture, my books, and the few remaining items I owned. But the instructions went deeper. I wanted the basement stripped back to its bare, cold concrete. While the physical crew worked, I began the digital purge. For years, David had relied on my pristine credit and organizational skills to anchor his chaotic life. I logged into the cellular provider portal and severed my phone from his family plan, transferring my number to a private corporate account. I canceled the joint auto insurance policy he had forced me to co-sign, leaving his and Sylvia's luxury vehicles completely uninsured. I wiped my payment history from the utility accounts, transferring the billing directly back to his name. Let him return to a mountain of final notices. Then I tackled the family cloud server. Sylvia had insisted on a shared drive to hoard thousands of photos showcasing their perfect blended family. I was rarely in the pictures, but I was the one paying the monthly storage fee. I downloaded my personal files, locked them behind military-grade encryption, and permanently deleted my payment method from the cloud account. The system immediately flagged the account for suspension. Within 48 hours, their entire digital archive of fake happiness would be locked behind a paywall they could no longer access. I watched the live video feed again. The moving crew was bringing up the last of my boxes. They systematically removed the light fixtures I had installed, the custom blinds I had purchased to hide the ugly basement windows, and even the upgraded showerhead I had bought with my own money. I was taking back every single cent I had invested into that miserable space. By the time they finished, the basement looked exactly as it had the day David forced me into it, a hollow, depressing concrete box void of life. Rachel brought me a cup of herbal tea, setting it gently on the marble table. "You are completely scrubbing yourself from his reality," she observed, watching the movers lock the basement door on the screen. "He told me I was excess baggage," I replied without looking away from the monitor. "I am simply ensuring he travels light from now on. When he walks through that door, he will not find a single reminder that he ever had a daughter named Caroline." Catherine stood near the panoramic window, her silhouette framed against the Chicago skyline. "A clean extraction is crucial," she noted, her voice steady and approving. "You sever the emotional supply before you sever the financial supply. Narcissists feed on evidence of their control. By emptying that room down to the studs, you are depriving him of the physical proof that he ever owned you. He will return to an empty cavern that reflects his own soul." Jamal walked over, handing me a stack of freshly printed documents. "The physical extraction is done, and the legal extraction is finalizing," he announced. "I have drafted the official cease and desist orders, along with the formal dissolution of your co-signer status on all residual accounts. Because we have documented evidence of his mortgage fraud, the banks are allowing an emergency expedited release of your liability. You are financially untethered from David." I signed the documents, my pen gliding across the paper with deliberate, forceful strokes. Every signature was another shackle falling away. I thought about the girl who had cried herself to sleep in that damp basement, wondering why she was never good enough to sit upstairs with the rest of the family. She was gone. The woman sitting in the penthouse suite was armed with federal evidence and surrounded by a brilliant protective legal shield. The moving truck just cleared the neighborhood, Jamal confirmed, checking a message on his phone. "Your belongings are currently en route to a secure climate-controlled storage facility under my firm's corporate name. Nobody will be able to track them or access them without my direct legal authorization." "Perfect," I said, closing the laptop and turning my full attention to the phone sitting on the table. The physical and digital erasure was complete. I was a ghost to David. The only thing tying us together now was the impending devastation he was about to face. The sun began to set over Lake Michigan, casting long golden shadows across the penthouse. We ordered dinner, discussing the tactical timeline for the next 48 hours. David and Sylvia were scheduled to enjoy a 5-star luau tonight. Tomorrow they planned to rent a private yacht using the fraudulent shell company account. We anticipated a massive and spectacular public implosion to unfold soon. Just as the room service cart arrived, my phone screen illuminated. The silence in the room instantly vanished. All four of us stared at the device. The caller ID flashed brightly. It was David. The financial blockades had not fully hit him yet, but something else must have triggered his radar. Or maybe he just wanted to issue another cruel command from paradise demanding I scrub another floor. I did not answer. I let it ring, watching his name flash until the screen finally went dark. The trap was perfectly set. The trap was perfectly set. Back in Oak Park, the suburban fortress stood in darkness, a silent monument to an empire built on lies. While we sat in the penthouse suite, analyzing the digital fallout, my mind wandered back to the physical trap we had left. The eviction was absolute, but the security measures Jamal implemented were psychological warfare. He did not merely replace the deadbolts. As a seasoned attorney, he had his contractor install commercial-grade biometric locks on every entry point. The brass fixtures were tied to a remote server controlled by Jamal's firm. If David or Sylvia attempted to bypass the keypad, the system would dispatch private security and law enforcement. The perimeter was entirely impenetrable. Inside that locked fortress, the silence was deafening. For years, that house had been filled with the obnoxious sounds of Sylvia's loud dinner parties, Tristan's booming video games, and Brittany's endless complaints about her social life. Now it was a tomb. But the true centerpiece of this destruction was waiting in the basement. When the moving crew completely stripped my living space down to the bare concrete walls, I made a deliberate, tactical decision. I left a secondary and much more extensive copy of the forensic dossier right in the center of the room. It sat squarely on top of the bare, stripped mattress of the cheap metal bed frame David had forced me to sleep on for years. I wanted him to walk into the house, find the upper floors locked down by evidence tags, and realize he had to descend into the very basement he banished me to just to understand his own ruin. The binder resting on that stripped bed was a massive comprehensive ledger of federal crimes. It weighed nearly 10 pounds. It was a literal, ticking time bomb waiting for the exact moment he returned. Inside those heavy black covers, I had arranged the evidence with ruthless precision. The first tab contained the raw bank statements from the shell company, proving he stole the child support Catherine sent. I used a bright red highlighter to track every single dollar diverted from my college education straight to Sylvia's luxury boutique accounts. The second tab held the forged mortgage documents. I included high-resolution color prints of the digital closing room screenshots clearly showing Brittany posing as me. Next to those images, I attached the IP address logs placing Brittany at a coffee shop barely 2 miles away during the transaction. There was no defense against it. It was undeniable proof of conspiracy to commit identity theft and wire fraud. The third section documented his corporate embezzlement at Apex Materials. I printed out the fake vendor invoices for the house renovations and the fraudulent lease agreements for Tristan and Brittany's luxury vehicles. I even included the email where he approved the purchase of Sylvia's 10-carat diamond ring, using funds disguised as international supply chain expenses. Leaving that massive dossier on my stripped bed was a poetic execution. David always told me I was useless, that my career was boring, and that I contributed nothing to his family. He demanded I stay down in that cold basement so I would not ruin his perfect image. Now the only thing left in that basement was the absolute proof that my boring career was the very instrument of his destruction. Every page in that binder represented a nail in his coffin. The bomb was primed, and the countdown was running. In the penthouse, Catherine ordered another round of sparkling water, her eyes constantly tracking the financial monitoring software on Jamal's screen. She was a general surveying a battlefield long before the enemy even realized the war had started. Rachel paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows fueled by years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. The energy in the room was electric sharp and focused. We were no longer waiting for David's approval or fearing his rejection. We were simply managing his downfall. My phone remained silent after that single missed call. David was likely sitting by a resort pool holding a tropical drink, wondering why his compliant, obedient daughter was not answering his demands. The financial blockades were slowly tightening like a noose around his neck. First, his secondary corporate cards would begin declining. Then the alerts from his primary bank would start flooding his inbox, indicating suspicious activity and frozen assets. He would probably assume it was a simple banking error, an annoying glitch he could solve with a quick, angry phone call to customer service. He had absolutely no idea that the error was actually a federal asset seizure initiated by the daughter he discarded at Gate 24. Every hour that passed brought him closer to the inevitable shock. His vacation was operating on stolen funds that no longer existed. The luxury resort management would soon request a valid payment method for his lavish suite and the expensive room service orders. The rental car agency would demand a functioning credit card for the luxury convertible he was driving around Maui. The illusion of his immense wealth was evaporating by the second, leaving him utterly defenseless. And when the tropical paradise finally rejected him completely, he would have no choice but to retreat to his safe haven in Chicago. He would fly back expecting to exert his authority and demand groveling explanations from me. He would march up to his grand front door, expecting his brass key to slide smoothly into the familiar lock. Instead, he would find the bright red legal notices glaring at him from the wood. He would find the biometric locks denying him entry. And eventually, when he forced his way inside, he would find the red evidence tags claiming all his possessions. He would have to walk down those narrow wooden stairs into my empty basement to find the massive binder sitting on the stripped bed. The ticking time bomb was patiently waiting in the cold, dark basement, fully loaded and ready to detonate the moment he opened the heavy cover. The first text arrived at exactly 9 o'clock the following morning. We were sitting around the marble dining table in the penthouse suite, drinking black coffee and watching the digital monitoring dashboard Jamal had set up. The screen displayed a live feed of the asset freezes cascading through the banking system. My phone vibrated against the polished stone surface. The screen lit up, displaying a message from David. "Caroline, the resort is saying my primary platinum card was declined. Call the bank immediately and clear the fraud alert. You know I travel this time of year. Fix it before we head down to the cabana." It was a classic David maneuver. He assumed any inconvenience was an administrative error that his subordinate daughter needed to resolve. He still thought he was the CEO commanding his fleet. He still thought he held the leash. I picked up the phone. Rachel leaned over my shoulder, reading the text. Catherine took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes fixed on my screen. Jamal simply smirked, waiting for my response. I did not type out an explanation. I did not defend myself or ask for an apology for how he treated me at the airport. I tapped the keyboard with deliberate precision. I cannot authorize transactions on accounts that are currently under federal review. I hit send and set the phone face down. The penthouse was completely silent. 10 minutes passed before the device vibrated again. This time he sent 2 messages back to back. "What federal review? Stop playing games, Caroline. Sylvia is trying to book a private catamaran for Tristan and Brittany, and the charter company is saying the secondary corporate cards are locked too. I do not have time for your passive-aggressive tantrums just because you missed the flight. Unfreeze the accounts right now, or you are paying for the boat rental yourself." He was so deeply entrenched in his own entitlement that he literally could not process the reality of his situation. He thought my absence from the flight was just a tantrum. He thought he could still threaten me financially. I looked at Jamal, who nodded, granting me the legal clearance to drop the next hint. I picked up the phone again. "The corporate accounts are locked because Vanguard Partners flagged the Apex Materials merger prospectus for embezzlement." The response took 20 minutes this time. I imagined him standing in the extravagant resort lobby, staring at his screen, the first cold sweat of genuine panic breaking across his forehead. He was likely pulling Sylvia aside, trying to keep his voice down so the other wealthy tourists would not hear his financial foundation cracking. When his reply finally came, it was a frantic, aggressive paragraph, devoid of his usual polished grammar. "You have absolutely no right to look at those corporate files. I am the CEO. You are just a junior auditor. You have no authority to flag anything. Call your manager immediately and retract whatever stupid report you filed. You are jeopardizing a $10 million buyout. If you ruin this deal, I will personally ensure you are fired and blacklisted from the financial sector. Fix this today." He was still trying to pull rank. He still thought he could intimidate me by threatening my career. He forgot that my career was the exact weapon currently dismantling his life. I typed my third reply, maintaining the icy detached tone of a prosecutor presenting exhibits to a jury. "I am the lead forensic auditor assigned to the file, and I cannot retract a report that has already been handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The text message bubble appeared, showing he was typing. Then it stopped. Then it started again. He was spiraling. Another message came through. The FBI. Caroline, you have lost your mind. There is no fraud. It is standard corporate accounting. You are going to go to jail for filing false reports. Pick up the phone right now. Sylvia is crying because the hotel manager just asked us for a new payment method for the suite. You are embarrassing us in front of everyone. Answer my calls. He tried calling me 5 times in a row. I declined every single call, sending him straight to voicemail. I wanted him to feel the exact same rejection I felt when I stood at gate 24, begging for a reason why my ticket was canceled. I wanted him to experience the terror of being completely stranded without resources. The next text message shifted from corporate threats to domestic intimidation. He realized he could not control my job, so he reverted to the only leverage he thought he had left: the house. If you do not answer this phone and fix these bank accounts, you are done. I am kicking you out of the Oak Park house. I want your basement apartment cleared out by the time we get back. You can find somewhere else to live since you want to act like an ungrateful traitor. You have 24 hours to pack your trash and leave my property. Rachel let out a sharp laugh. Catherine shook her head, her expression turning lethal. The sheer audacity to threaten you with eviction from a house he illegally mortgaged, Catherine stated. Put him out of his misery, Caroline. Tell him. I picked up the phone for the final time that morning. I wanted to make sure my words stripped away his last remaining illusion of safety. I typed slowly, ensuring every letter carried the full weight of the trap we had set. I already moved out of the basement and left the mortgage fraud evidence on your bed. The text delivered successfully. The typing bubble never appeared again. He finally understood that he was no longer talking to an obedient daughter. He was speaking to an auditor who had successfully executed his financial demise. The ticking time bomb had detonated, and their luxurious island vacation was officially over. It took them 3 days to claw their way back to Chicago. With all corporate and personal accounts frozen solid by the federal injunction, David and Sylvia had to rely on a maxed-out emergency credit card Brittany had hidden away just to secure flights home. There were no first-class upgrades this time. They flew coach-seated entirely apart in middle seats near the back of the aircraft. I knew this because Jamal had his investigators monitoring their travel manifests. They landed at OHare, the exact same airport where they had discarded me just a week prior, looking significantly worse for wear. They hauled their own luggage through the terminal without the luxury of premium services or private lounges. They had to take a standard taxi back to the suburbs because the car service company had declined David's blacklisted profile. The entire ride to Oak Park must have been suffocating. David likely spent the hour seething, rehearsing the vicious lecture he planned to deliver the moment he walked through the door. He still operated under the delusion that he could shout his way out of a federal crime. Sylvia was undoubtedly complaining about the indignity of flying commercial coach, while Tristan and Brittany sulked in the back seat, mourning their ruined vacation. They pulled into the sprawling, circular driveway of the Oak Park mansion late in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, casting a gray shadow over the brick facade. From the street, the house looked completely normal. The landscaping was perfectly manicured, and the large windows reflected the suburban neighborhood. David paid the taxi driver with the last of Brittany's cash and grabbed his golf clubs from the trunk. He marched up the front walkway, his jaw set with furious determination, ready to unleash hell on the daughter he thought was cowering in the basement. He reached the grand oak front entryway and pulled his brass key from his pocket. He jammed it into the lock and twisted. It did not budge. He tried again, rattling the handle with increasing aggression. The heavy wooden door remained completely unyielding. "What is wrong with the door?" Sylvia whined, dragging her heavy designer suitcase up the brick steps. "Open it, David. I am exhausted and I need a hot shower." Tristan and Brittany trudged up behind her, complaining about the humidity and the terrible airline food. "The lock is stuck," David muttered, pulling the key out and inspecting it. Then he looked up and finally noticed the new hardware. The standard brass deadbolt had been replaced with a heavy-duty commercial biometric scanner. A sleek black digital keypad stared back at him, completely unfamiliar and entirely unyielding. "What the hell is this?" David demanded, pushing his thumb against the blank scanner. A red light flashed instantly, followed by a sharp, rejecting beep. "Did that ungrateful brat change the locks?" Sylvia shrieked, dropping her suitcase on the porch. "How dare she? I am going to have her arrested for vandalism." David stepped back from the door, his eyes scanning the entryway for a hidden key or a broken window. That was when he finally registered the bright neon-colored documents taped securely to the wood, right at eye level. In his furious rush to get inside and assert his dominance, he had completely ignored the legal notices plastered across his own front porch. He leaned in closer, squinting at the bold black text. Sylvia peered over his shoulder, her annoyance shifting into confusion. "What does that say?" she asked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the official county seal stamped at the top of the page. David began reading the document aloud, his voice starting off strong but rapidly deteriorating into a strained, breathless whisper. "Notice of temporary asset seizure. Property secured under federal injunction. Unauthorized entry prohibited by order of the United States District Court." Tristan pushed past his sister to read the second notice taped near the doorbell. "This one is from the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Tristan announced, his usual arrogant smirk completely vanishing. "It says the premises contain illicitly acquired assets tied to an active wire fraud and embezzlement investigation. Anyone attempting to bypass the perimeter will be subject to immediate arrest for evidence tampering." Brittany gasped, stumbling backward until she hit the porch railing. "Dad, what is going on?" she panicked. "Why is the FBI taping signs to our house?" David stood paralyzed. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. The text message I had sent him in Hawaii was not a dramatic threat. It was a factual status update. The federal investigation was real. The locked accounts were real. The eviction was real. He reached out and grabbed the brass door handle again, pulling on it with desperate, erratic force. The commercial lock did not even rattle. David opened the door. Sylvia screamed, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. "Open the door right now. All my jewelry is in there. My clothes are in there. I cannot open it, Sylvia," David stammered, his voice shaking as the reality of his total destruction crashed down upon him. "The bank has seized the property. We are locked out." He stepped back from the entrance, staring at the notices like they were written in a foreign language. The suburban fortress he had built using stolen child support and fraudulent mortgages was now completely impenetrable. Tristan pulled out his phone, desperately trying to access his online banking app. "My accounts show zero balances," Tristan yelled, his face contorting in panic. "Everything is frozen. I cannot even buy a bottle of water." Brittany sank down onto her suitcase, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly into the quiet suburban street. The neighbors were definitely watching now. The pristine image David had ruthlessly guarded his entire life was shattering in broad daylight. The panic was absolute, and I watched it all unfold from the live security feed sitting inside the hotel room. I closed the security application on my laptop. The live feed I had watched from the hotel was actually recorded 20 minutes prior when their taxi entered the neighborhood. We were no longer at the Four Seasons. Catherine, Jamal, Rachel, and I had taken the armored SUV back to Oak Park, slipping through the rear service entrance moments before David threw his tantrum on the porch. Now we stood silently in the shadows of the grand living room, waiting to strike. Jamal tapped the screen of his tablet, sending a remote override command to the commercial biometric lock. A heavy mechanical click echoed through the silent foyer. On the porch, David stopped mid-sentence. He pushed against the heavy oak door, and it slowly creaked open. He stumbled over the threshold, nearly dropping his golf clubs. Sylvia pushed past him, dragging her designer luggage across the marble floor. Tristan and Brittany followed, looking around the dimly lit entryway with wide, terrified eyes. David reached for the wall switch and flicked on the grand chandelier. The bright light flooded the space, illuminating the sea of bright red evidence tags plastered across every single piece of luxury furniture, every piece of artwork, and every electronic device in the room. "What is this?" Sylvia gasped, dropping her bag. David ignored her, his eyes frantically scanning the room. "Caroline," he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I know you are here. Come out right now and explain this vandalism. You have completely lost your mind." He stormed toward the center of the living room, his fists clenched at his sides. He expected to find a cowering daughter ready to accept his verbal abuse. Instead, a figure stepped gracefully out of the shadows near the grand fireplace. It was not me. Catherine wore a tailored charcoal suit, her posture radiating absolute authority. She stepped into the light, her dark hair catching the gleam of the chandelier. "Hello, David," she said, her voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "It has been 20 years. You look exactly as pathetic as I remember." David froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a tagged velvet armchair for support. "Catherine." He breathed out the name like a curse. "What are you doing in my house?" "Your house?" Catherine laughed, a sharp, chilling sound that commanded the entire room. "You mean the house you illegally remortgaged using my daughter's forged signature? Or do you mean the house you furnished using the child support money I sent for 20 years? The money you stole while telling my girls I was a worthless addict?" Sylvia stepped forward, her face twisted in confusion. "David, who is this woman? Why is she in our living room?" Catherine did not even look at Sylvia. She kept her piercing gaze locked entirely on my father. "I am the billionaire venture capitalist he has been hiding from you, Sylvia. I am the woman who unknowingly funded your entire fake life. And as of this morning, I am the reason your husband is facing decades in federal prison." Jamal stepped out from the hallway directly behind Catherine. His tall, commanding presence instantly dominated the space. He wore a sharp navy suit, holding a thick stack of legal documents in his right hand. He walked straight to the glass coffee table and dropped the heavy paperwork onto the surface with a resounding smack. "Let us be incredibly precise about who owns this property," David Jamal stated, his deep voice ringing with absolute legal authority. "I am Jamal. I am Rachel's husband, and I am the real estate attorney who just dismantled your entire fraudulent existence." He pointed a firm finger at the documents on the table. "Those are formal notices of immediate foreclosure and federal asset seizure. You do not own this house. The bank has frozen the deed because you committed mortgage fraud." Brittany let out a loud sob, shrinking behind her brother. Jamal shifted his intense gaze directly to her. "And you, Brittany," he continued, his tone turning lethal. "We have the digital closing room footage. We have your IP address pinging from a local coffee shop. We have federal proof of you committing identity theft and wire fraud to secure that $400,000 loan. You are listed as a co-conspirator on a federal indictment." Tristan puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "You cannot just come in here and take our things," Tristan yelled, pointing at the red tags covering the television and the furniture. "My BMW is out there in the garage. You have no right to touch my car." Rachel stepped out from the hallway, standing next to her husband. "You mean the car David leased using the corporate accounts of his bankrupt supply company?" Rachel asked, her voice dripping with disgust. "The car he funded using the exact child support money he embezzled from our mother. You do not own that car, Tristan. You do not own anything. You are just a parasite feeding off stolen assets." David shook his head violently, refusing to accept the reality crumbling around him. "This is a setup," he stammered, looking frantically toward the stairs. "Where is Caroline? She is behind this. I know she is." I stepped out from the dark corner near the dining room, holding a single black folder in my hands. The room fell dead silent. I did not look like the quiet, submissive girl he had left at the airport. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, my eyes locked onto his. "I am right here, Dad," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "You told me to go back to the house and clean the bathroom." But I decided to thoroughly and legally clean out your entire fake life instead, starting right now today in this living room and ending in a federal prison cell before the coming weekend is completely over. David stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked from the massive binder on the coffee table to the harsh, unyielding expression on my face. "You are bluffing," he finally managed to say, though his voice lacked any of its usual booming authority. "You do not have the power to put me in prison, Caroline. You are just an accountant. You look at spreadsheets. You do not dictate federal law." I walked slowly toward the glass table, my heels clicking against the marble floor. "I am not just an accountant, Dad," I corrected him, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. "I am a forensic auditor for Vanguard Partners. Does that name sound familiar to you?" I watched his eyes widen in sudden, absolute horror. "It should sound very familiar because you submitted a 60-page merger prospectus to our firm last month. You begged Vanguard for a $10 million buyout to save Apex Materials from complete bankruptcy." He took another step backward, hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. "You reviewed my files," he whispered, the realization draining the last remaining color from his cheeks. "I did more than review them," I said, tapping the black binder. "I dismantled them. I saw exactly how you tried to hide your insolvency. You took the $400,000 you stole from this house using Brittany's forged signature and funneled it directly into your corporate accounts. You disguised that stolen equity as an anonymous angel investment to make your balance sheet look profitable to my firm. You were trying to sell a rotting hollow company to the very woman whose child support you have been stealing for 2 decades. Catherine crossed her arms, watching him squirm. "Vanguard Partners frequently collaborates with my venture capital firm, David," she stated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You were literally trying to scam me twice. First, by stealing my money to raise your stepchildren, and second, by trying to sell me your worthless, failing business, using that exact same stolen money to prop up the valuation. The sheer stupidity is almost breathtaking." "You cannot use that information," David shouted, panic finally breaking through his shock. "That is a breach of corporate confidentiality. You signed non-disclosure agreements, Caroline. You will be fired and stripped of your credentials for sharing proprietary acquisition data." I smiled, a cold, predatory expression that mirrored my mother's. "I did not breach confidentiality, Dad. I followed standard operating procedure. When a Vanguard auditor uncovers active felony wire fraud and blatant corporate embezzlement during a preliminary assessment, we are legally mandated to execute a hard lockdown. I did not share your proprietary data with the public. I submitted a red flag report directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They locked your servers this morning. The merger is dead, and the federal agents have every single fake invoice you ever created." The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. The gravity of the situation finally settled over David. He was not just broke. He was a documented federal criminal with no escape route and no financial resources. His entire fake empire had been burned to the ground by the daughter he treated like a servant. Suddenly, Sylvia let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. She dropped her designer purse onto the floor and turned on my father with a viciousness that startled even Tristan and Brittany. "You are broke," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You told me the company was just experiencing a minor cash flow issue. You said the Vanguard buyout was a guaranteed $10 million payout. You lied to me, David." "Sylvia, please," David pleaded, holding up his hands in a desperate attempt to placate her. "We can fix this. I will call my lawyers. We can figure out a defense strategy." "With what money?" Sylvia screamed, slapping his hands away. "They froze the accounts. You mortgaged the house illegally. You involved my daughter in a federal crime. You are going to prison, and you are trying to drag us down with you." She spun around to face Jamal, her perfectly manicured hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I did not know he was stealing child support. I did not know the business was failing. I am a victim of his financial manipulation, too. You cannot seize my personal belongings or hold me responsible for his corporate fraud." Jamal let out a deep, booming laugh that filled the room. It was the laugh of a predator cornering its prey. "Do not try to play the innocent victim," Sylvia, Jamal said, stepping forward and pointing a long, commanding finger at her. "You are not a bystander. You are a documented co-conspirator." I pulled the incorporation papers for Oak Park Holdings. "David added you as a primary signatory to the shell company exactly 1 month after your wedding." Sylvia froze her eyes, darting nervously toward the door as if calculating her chances of escape. "You actively signed the checks," Jamal continued relentlessly. "You used the corporate debit card tied to that fraudulent account to purchase $12,000 handbags and finance luxury vacations. You signed the lease agreements for Tristan's BMW and Brittany's Range Rover under the guise of executive corporate transport. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when your signature is on the very documents used to launder stolen money across state lines. The federal government does not care if you pretend you did not know where the cash came from. You spent the stolen funds. You are going down right beside him." "I am not going to jail," Sylvia sobbed hysterically, her carefully maintained mask of superiority completely shattered. "I am not a criminal. I am a respected member of the country club. I cannot go to federal prison." She turned back to David, striking his chest with her fists. "You ruined my life, you failure," she screamed. "I left a wealthy man for you because you promised me an empire. Now we are going to be homeless felons because you could not cover your tracks." David grabbed her wrists, pushing her away. "Shut up, Sylvia," he snarled, his facade gone, revealing the desperate man underneath. "Let me fix this." He locked eyes with me. The tyrant who abandoned me at the airport was gone. In his place stood a man attempting the ultimate performance of paternal affection. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Caroline, please," he pleaded. "Look at what is happening here. We do not need to do this. We are blood. We are family. You and I have a special bond. You know how much I love you. Everything I did was to keep a roof over your head." I stared at him, letting his desperate, pathetic words hang heavily in the completely silent room. "A special bond," I repeated, my tone remaining completely dead and flat. "Is that exactly what you call 20 years of continuous emotional abuse and financial exploitation? Is that what you call moving me into a damp basement while using my own mother's stolen money to buy those luxury cars for your stepchildren?" He took another small step forward, raising his trembling hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I was under immense pressure, Caroline. The business was struggling, and I had to make impossible choices to keep this family afloat. I was trying to protect you from the ugly realities of the corporate world. I made administrative errors, yes. I cut corners, but I did it out of love. I did not want you or Rachel to feel the burden of my financial stress." Rachel let out a loud, disgusted laugh from across the room. "You protected us by forging our signatures and stealing our college funds, David. You are unbelievable." David ignored Rachel, keeping his laser focus entirely on me. He knew I was the one holding the detonator to his federal indictment. He knew my preliminary audit report at the private equity firm was the single only thing standing between him and a lucrative multi-million-dollar corporate buyout. Tristan and Brittany watched in completely stunned, silent horror, finally realizing their perfectly manicured, luxurious lives depended solely on my mercy. "Caroline, you have always been the reasonable one," he pleaded, his eyes widening with manufactured sincerity. "You are smart. You are logical. You know that destroying me destroys the entire family. Tristan and Brittany will have criminal records. Sylvia will lose everything. And what will you gain? Nothing but a broken family. You can easily withdraw the final federal submission immediately, Caroline. You can tell your firm it was a miscalculation, an error in your auditing software. Jamal can drop the injunctions. We can sit down like adults, figure out a repayment plan, and move forward. I will make it right, Caroline. I swear to you, I will make it right. Just give your father a second chance." The manipulation was so thick it felt suffocating. For a brief second, I looked at his aging face, the graying hair at his temples, the genuine terror in his eyes. And I remembered the little girl who used to crave his approval, the girl who would have done anything to hear him say he was proud of her. But that girl died at gate 24 when he threw $100 bill at her and told her to clean a bathroom. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing barely a foot away from him. I looked directly into his eyes, stripping away every ounce of emotion. "I am a forensic auditor," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the grand living room. "I do not make miscalculations. I do not blame my software. And I absolutely do not retract federal fraud reports to protect criminals." His face crumpled, the fake paternal affection dissolving back into raw panic. "Caroline, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this to me. I am your father. We are family. I will go to prison. I will lose my company. I have no money. I have no cars. I do not even have a way to leave this neighborhood right now because my cards are frozen. What am I supposed to do?" I looked at him, the man who had stolen millions, and demanded gratitude for the scraps he tossed me. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face as I delivered the exact words he had given me when he shattered my heart. "You are 58 years old, David. Stop making a scene. You have a failing job. You are a smart man. Just order an Uber, go to the police station, and we will see you in 20 years. Try to reflect on your attitude while you are locked up. Maybe if you were more supportive of your actual daughters, you would not feel so isolated right now." The absolute silence that followed my words was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The callback hit him with the force of a freight train. He actually staggered backward, his mouth falling open as the realization slammed into him. I was not negotiating. I was not seeking his apology. I was executing his sentence. He looked from me to Catherine, who was watching him with a triumphant, deadly gaze. He looked at Rachel and Jamal, who stood together, an impenetrable legal wall. He looked at Sylvia, who was still weeping uncontrollably on the hardwood floor, surrounded by the bright red evidence tags that clearly marked the absolute end of her luxurious and parasitic existence. He had absolutely nothing left. The kingdom he built on lies had burned to the ground, and he was standing in the ashes. I turned my back on him. Done. The heavy silence in the grand living room was suddenly shattered by a faint, high-pitched wailing sound in the distance. The noise grew rapidly louder, multiplying and echoing across the meticulously manicured lawns of the exclusive neighborhood. Flashing red and blue lights began to pulse fiercely through the tall, custom windows, casting harsh, frantic shadows across the imported marble floors and illuminating the bright red evidence tags we had plastered over their fake life. David froze completely, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door. The reality of my earlier warning finally penetrated his thick, arrogant skull. "You actually called them," he whispered, his voice entirely devoid of breath and vibrating with raw terror. "You called the federal authorities on your own father." "I did not just call them," I replied, my back still turned to him. "I handed them a beautifully wrapped and bow-tied federal indictment, detailing every single one of your felonies." Jamal stepped to the forefront of our group, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with a sharp, brutally professional motion. "The time for pathetic family negotiations and gaslighting is officially over," Jamal declared, his deep voice booming effortlessly over the approaching sirens. "As a sworn officer of the court and the legal representative of this property's rightful owners, I am executing the final phase of this repossession." Heavy boots pounded against the brick walkway outside. The doorbell did not ring. Instead, a loud, aggressive pounding rattled the heavy oak door, shaking the glass panes. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," a stern, commanding voice shouted from the porch. "Open the door immediately and step away from the entrance." Sylvia let out a blood-curdling shriek, scrambling backward until her back hit the wall. Tristan and Brittany grabbed onto each other, shaking uncontrollably as their pampered, sheltered reality imploded. David stood entirely paralyzed, unable to move a single muscle as the undeniable reality of federal prison materialized on his own front porch. Jamal walked calmly to the entryway. He tapped the biometric scanner, overriding the security lock, and pulled the heavy door wide open. A tactical team of federal agents dressed in dark windbreakers with bold yellow lettering flooded into the foyer. They were accompanied by local police officers who immediately fanned out to secure the perimeter, blocking every possible exit. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a thick folder under his arm, stepped into the living room. His sharp eyes swept across the terrified family members before landing respectfully on Jamal. "Counselor," the agent said, giving Jamal a curt professional nod. "We received the expedited fraud package from Vanguard Partners and the corresponding asset freeze injunctions your firm filed. Everything is precisely documented." Agent Miller. Jamal responded, handing over a secondary encrypted flash drive. "You will find the IP address logs for the forged digital closing and the routing numbers for the embezzled child support funds on that drive. The property has already been tagged for asset forfeiture." Agent Miller turned his full attention to my father. "David, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and massive corporate embezzlement." He gestured to the two burly officers beside him. "Cuff him right now." The officers moved forward swiftly, spinning David around and slamming his wrists together behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the vaulted ceilings was absolutely the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. David did not fight them. He went entirely limp, his shoulders sagging heavily as the officers read him his Miranda rights. The arrogant CEO who demanded absolute obedience and reverence from everyone around him was instantly reduced to a pathetic, whimpering shell of a man. "Sylvia, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and active possession of stolen assets," Agent Miller announced, gesturing to a female officer. "No," Sylvia shrieked, thrashing wildly as the officer firmly grabbed her arms. "You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here. I did not do anything wrong. David lied to me about the money. I belong at the country club, not in a dirty jail cell. Get your hands off my expensive designer jacket." Her hysterical screaming did absolutely nothing to stop the cold steel from snapping shut around her wrists. She kicked and flailed violently, losing one of her expensive stilettos on the marble floor. The contrast between her luxurious outfit and her feral, undignified behavior was jarring and incredibly pathetic. Brittany and Tristan were weeping openly, completely terrified that they were next. Agent Miller looked at them with pure, unfiltered disgust. "We have federal documentation showing you actively participated in identity theft, Brittany. And Tristan, your fraudulent corporate salary is part of an active tax evasion investigation. You are both considered persons of interest. You are not being detained today, but you are legally evicted from this seized property immediately. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather whatever untagged clothing you can carry and vacate these premises. If you attempt to take any tagged evidence, you will be arrested on the spot." The officers hauled David and Sylvia toward the front door. I followed closely behind, standing on the front porch to watch the final act of this glorious execution. The scene outside was perfectly orchestrated chaos. 5 squad cars and 2 unmarked black SUVs sat idling in the circular driveway, their emergency lights flashing brightly against the twilight sky. But the most beautiful part was the audience. Every single neighbor in the affluent cul-de-sac had stepped out onto their lawns. The neighborhood gossip was standing right at the edge of the property line, her smartphone raised high, recording every single second of the spectacle. Other wealthy neighbors stood in their driveways, whispering, pointing, and shaking their heads. The pristine, flawless image David and Sylvia had ruthlessly protected and weaponized against me was completely obliterated in front of the exact people they desperately wanted to impress. David kept his head bowed, staring at the concrete as the officers marched him past the glowing landscaping lights. He could not look at his neighbors. He could not look at the luxury cars tagged with evidence stickers. And he certainly could not look at me. Sylvia, however, fought the entire way down the walkway. "This is a massive misunderstanding," she screamed to the watching crowd, her face streaked with ruined mascara. "We are wealthy. We are good people. My husband is a respected CEO." Nobody offered her an ounce of sympathy. The officers shoved her into the back of a squad car, slamming the door shut and cutting off her frantic shrieks. David was placed into the back of a separate federal vehicle. Tristan and Brittany stumbled out of the front door a few minutes later, carrying garbage bags stuffed with basic clothing. They had no cars to drive. They had no frozen credit cards to use. They were forced to walk down the long driveway and head toward the main road, hauling their trash bags under the harsh, judgmental gaze of the entire neighborhood. They looked exactly like the helpless peasants they had always accused me of being. Jamal stood beside me on the porch, wrapping a protective arm around Rachel's shoulders. Catherine stepped up next to me, watching the taillights of the police cruisers illuminate the street as they drove away. The caravan of law enforcement vehicles turned the corner, disappearing into the night, and taking the toxic, rotting core of my past with them. Jamal handed a final clipboard of transfer deeds to the remaining officer securing the perimeter. "The house is completely yours now," Caroline, Jamal said quietly. "The infection has been entirely removed." I stood on the brick steps, breathing in the crisp evening air. The oppressive weight that had suffocated me for 20 years was completely and finally gone. I looked at Catherine, Rachel, and Jamal standing beside me. They were smiling. We got back into the heavy armored SUV and slowly drove away, leaving the dark, empty mansion behind us forever. It felt absolutely perfect. 6 months have passed since that spectacular, unforgettable night in Oak Park. The entire fallout from the massive federal raid was absolute and incredibly swift. David and Sylvia desperately tried to hire a high-profile defense attorney, but with all their assets completely frozen, they were forced to rely on an overworked public defender. When the federal prosecutors finally presented the massive mountain of evidence Jamal and I had compiled, the forged mortgage documents, the fake vendor invoices, the shell company, routing numbers, and the audio recordings, their defense completely collapsed. David attempted to negotiate a plea deal by offering to testify against his former business partners. The federal prosecutors laughed at him, facing 30 years in prison. David ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and corporate embezzlement. The judge told him that using his own daughter's identity to steal equity and funding, a lavish lifestyle on stolen child support, were despicable acts of financial abuse. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without early parole. He lost his company, his reputation, and his freedom. Sylvia wept on the witness stand, claiming David had manipulated her and she had no idea the money was stolen. But Jamal had ensured the prosecution had all the documents proving she was an active signatory on the fraudulent shell company. Her signature was on every single luxury purchase. Sylvia was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and possession of illicitly acquired assets. Her beloved country club officially revoked her membership and publicly distanced themselves from her crimes. The reality check for Tristan and Brittany was equally brutal. With their fake corporate salaries terminated by the federal government, they were completely cut off from luxury. The sports cars were auctioned off to repay defrauded investors. Tristan and Brittany were forced to move into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. Having absolutely no real-world skills, they both ended up working grueling minimum-wage retail jobs. Tristan currently works the overnight stocking shift at a discount grocery store, while Brittany takes the public bus to her job at a fast food chain. They finally have to experience the exact same frugal, struggling lifestyle they used to mock me for enduring. As for my own life, the transformation has been miraculous. The executives at Vanguard Partners were incredibly impressed with how I handled the fraudulent merger attempt. They promoted me to Senior Director of Forensic Auditing, giving me my own investigative team and a massive salary increase. I bought a beautiful modern penthouse in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Every piece of furniture I own was bought with my own hard-earned money, and nobody is ever allowed to make me feel small in my own home again. Jamal successfully finalized the legal repossession of the Oak Park mansion. Rachel and I sold the property to a real estate developer and split the legitimate equity. We used a portion of those funds to set up a scholarship program for young women pursuing degrees in financial law and forensic accounting. Reconnecting with my mother has been the most beautiful part of this journey. Catherine and I have spent the last 6 months making up for 2 decades of stolen time. She is brilliant, fierce, and incredibly loving. We have Sunday dinners together every week with Rachel and Jamal. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I know exactly what it feels like to sit at a family dinner table without anxiety, fear, or the looming threat of emotional abuse. I finally have a real family. Looking back at the day David abandoned me at gate 24, I realize it was the greatest gift he could have given me. His cruelty was the catalyst I needed to stop playing the victim and start wielding my own power. When you are the scapegoat in a toxic family system, you are conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to your obedience. They train you to accept their scraps and apologize for taking up space. But the moment you realize that their power over you is entirely an illusion, everything changes. You are not obligated to protect people who continuously destroy your peace. You do not owe your loyalty to blood relatives who treat you like a disposable asset. You have the power to walk away, to gather your evidence, to secure your future, and to build an empire entirely on your own terms. Narcissists will use you until you have absolutely nothing left. So you have to become the brick wall they cannot break. I took my grief, my humiliation, and my accounting skills, and I turned them into a federal indictment that gave me my freedom. So what about you? Have you ever had to use your own strength to strike back against toxic family members who trampled over your boundaries? Have you ever flipped the script on the people who thought you were weak and proved to them exactly how powerful you truly are? Please share your story with us in the comments section below. I read every single one of them, and I love seeing how you all reclaim your power. If my journey resonated with you today, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel like you are just excess baggage. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.